Go ahead, Diane.
Welcome to Silent No More, a virtual discussion about domestic violence, an event planned to correspond with the UN 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Biased Violence. We wish to acknowledge that we live, work, and play on unceded Coast Salish territories, and specifically those of the Qualicum and Nanus nations. We thank them for sharing their land with us wherever we are today. We believe it is an especially important issue during this COVID pandemic time. Also, we wish to acknowledge all the help and support from the Haven Society and the university and the hard work done by the Parksville Qualicum Beach Canadian Federation of University Women in order to prepare for this event. We especially wish to acknowledge Eva Hilborn for thinking of the idea of this panel in the first place. I hope you are all comfortable with sending comments or questions through the chat function. I would ask that you all wait to post your questions or comments until we have finished. I would ask that you all wait to, if you wish a particular person to answer the question, please indicate that name. And if you want us to identify you as a speaker of the question or asker of the question, please let us know in the comment. Okay, today we have 6 speakers who are going to address the issue of domestic violence. They come from our extended community and will provide their insight on this issue. The speakers will present for 10 minutes each, and I will introduce each one before they're speaking. The first person that we'll call upon is Bonnie Wallis. She is an accountant in Parksville and has been in that business since 2003. She volunteers with a number of local organizations, usually as treasurer, and was appointed to the SOS board in 2017. She is a mother and grandmother to 2 granddaughters. Bonnie speaks about our topic from personal experience. Bonnie.
Thank you. And I'm happy to join your group today in support of the Parksville Qualicum Haven House Women's Shelter. I've been involved with Haven House, the local Haven House, for a number of years because I have used the very necessary services of a women's shelter in the past. Sorry, my dog's joining me or trying to join me at the moment. It may be surprising to some of you in the room who know me. It's sometimes surprising to me that I was required to use the services of Haven House because I'm a strong and confident woman now, but I wasn't always. At one point in time in my life, I had very low self-esteem and difficulty making decisions as a result of the abuse that I suffered by my spouse. I've made this presentation a few times before, but it is very raw and emotional for me, so please bear with me. I was married in 1990 and our marriage started out as happy as any other. We were happy in love, had 4 children living with us as a blended family. I have a natural daughter and 3 stepchildren. Yes, he had a temper, but I was raised in a home where tempers flared often and it was normal for me. But then things changed when we moved away from my family and support. I was totally reliant on him for financial support, emotional and social relationships. The emotional abuse began subtly, then escalated quite rapidly. The children and I were subjected to frequent verbal abuse, criticism, and that hair trigger temper, and it was always just at the surface. I was yelled at for not buying milk because he couldn't see it in the fridge. It was there, but it wasn't at the front of the fridge where he could see it, so it became my fault that it didn't appear at right off the bat. It got much worse when I told him I wanted to separate. He really didn't hold back then anymore. The arguments became more frequent and heated, and then became physical. He started by throwing me across the kitchen. Then he jumped on me and grabbed me by the throat. He was very apologetic and seemed genuinely sorry for this afterward. But then there were a couple more instances like this. I went to my doctor because I wasn't sleeping well and had difficulty making decisions. I was prescribed Prozac, which is an antidepressant. And then I went to see my chiropractor for pains that I was having in my neck and my shoulders. He asked me if I had suffered some kind of a fall or physical trauma. I lied and I told him no, that I had stumbled and fallen down the stairs. He told me that it didn't look like an injury that would have come from a fall like that, but I was too ashamed to tell the truth. My husband threw me into a door one time, and it was so hard that I had a bruise on my thigh that was very black, and it was the perfect imprint of the door handle. I started to see a counselor for emotional distress. Steve was quite supportive of this idea because he thought that it was important that we find out what was wrong with me. My daughter and I went to house sit at a friend's place for a couple of weeks. This provided some relief from the almost daily arguments and walking on eggshells. It was a temporary fix, but one that strengthened my resolve that we would escape from our home. And now my cat's trying to escape and climb on the computer. So I found a place to rent that was a reasonable rate. I'd saved some money for it, but it was very difficult as neither of us were working when we were existing on payments from EI. I rented it, but I didn't tell him. The unit had to be cleaned and painted, so it wasn't available until May. It all came to head for us in the middle of March 1994. We were having yet another argument, and I tried to escape the arguing by going into the bedroom, and he followed me and shut the door. I tried to get out, and he threw me across the room to the other side of the bed. And he wasn't one to use his fists, but he threw me around quite frequently. I tried to get out again, and he threw me against the door. Now, when I told my daughter that I would be making these presentations, she was quite adamant that I share this. Sorry, this makes me emotional. My daughter was on the other side of the door, and she saw the door buckle when I hit it. At that time, I was about 125 pounds, so he threw me with enough force to make the door buckle and for my daughter to be able to see it on the other side. Then he grabbed me again and threw me through the closet door. This door broke, and I was laying on top of it inside of our walk-in closet. My daughter realized that I was in trouble and yelled through the door, and I told her to call the police. She was able to dial 911. Then my stepson stepped in and hung up the phone. Because you see, my daughter was trying to protect me, and my stepson was trying to protect his father. He let me out of the room after the closet door was broken, and the 911 operator called back. I was able to get to the phone and told them to send a police car. Steve explained that the broken closet door was made when he stumbled against it and we both fell into the door. Now he was 6'2" and weighed over 200 pounds. So this was a much more reasonable explanation than throwing his wife through it, but it was a blatant lie. He was convincing enough, though, that I started to question my recollection of how that happened. And I started to second guess, did it happen the way he described? Then I realized that I was being brainwashed and my memory was correct. The attending officers made him leave, and I sat down with the kids to calm all of us down. He started phoning that night, phoning the house that night, and continued into the next day. I stopped answering the phone in the morning. Then about mid-afternoon, after all the calls throughout the day, I decided I would take a chance and maybe talk to him. So I answered the phone the next time it rang, and it was a member of the SOS domestic abuse team. She was worried that she'd called a few times and there was no answer. This was before we had answering machines. I was told that I had the option to go to a safe house if he continued to harass me. The next time I answered the phone, he had decided that he'd stayed away long enough and that he was coming home whether I liked it or not. So I bundled the kids in the car, went to the SOS office, got directions to the safe house, and that was where we went. I spoke to the safe house counselor the next day. She explained my options. Didn't have a choice about keeping his children with me as he'd been given custody in a previous legal decision. So I went back to our house, collected the clothes for me and my daughter, and we moved out, never lived there again. We stayed with friends until our little rental cabin was available and then moved into it. This cabin was 20 feet by 23 feet. It was 460 square feet, but it was a castle. Then I got a call from a friend. Her father was looking for a bookkeeper and was I interested? Yeah, you bet I was. So I started a new job. One day I was working and realized that I hadn't taken my depression medication for a few days, and I still felt pretty good. So I talked to my doctor about it and I stopped taking it. Then I started chatting with an accountant who had an office in the same building where I worked, and he agreed to sponsor me as a CGA student, and things got better bit by bit. And here I am now. I'm okay. I refuse to tolerate any abusive or bullying behavior. And I'm a much, much happier person. If statistics are correct, there's a possibility that there's an abused spouse within this panel. So my message is twofold. Number one, there is help available. And number two, you don't have to stay. Just need some water.
Thank you, Bonnie. Did you want another minute or so? Because we are on a time frame that, yeah, that was a very powerful message. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Toni Wheeler. Toni is the Executive Director of Haven Society, where she's been since March of 2019. She has extensive experience in both healthcare and community in senior leadership roles. As a community leader, Toni is committed to Haven Society's mission to promote the integrity and safety of women, children, youth, and families, and the development of a respectful and healthy community, and stakeholder relationships, volunteerism, and professionalism. Toni.
There we go. Thank you very much. Ooh, Bonnie, that's a difficult discussion to follow, but I I've heard your talk about your lived experience before, and similarly to today, I am just in awe of you for your courage and the empowerment that you bring to the work that we do at Haven Society. So thank you again, and I'll do my best to follow that, that act. I'd also like to thank Parksville Qualicum CFEW for allowing me to be here today, particularly during 16 Days of Activism, which began on November 25th and will end December 10th, which is Human Rights Day. 16 Days of Activism is an international movement, in short, that that's goal is to eradicate gender-based violence. And normally Haven Society joins with like-minded partners and has many different community activities. This year, because of COVID-19, of course, the world looks a little bit different, and we're very, very grateful. I'm very grateful to be able to be here today and for your innovation to allow us to do so. A little bit about Haven Society. Haven Society, our mission is to promote the integrity, safety, and safety for women, children, youth, and families, and the development of respectful and healthy communities. As a leading anti-violence organization operating from feminist principles, Haven Society will achieve this mission we envision by providing a range of services, public education, and advocacy. Among many things that we believe in, some of the stronger points I would think is that Haven Society believes that no one deserves to be abused, that violence has no place in relationships, that women and children are diverse and have the right to their difference, the right to have their differences respected and supported, and that the community has the right and responsibility to become involved. Haven Society started with very humble roots in 1978 when two undergraduate students, one who is with us today, Dawn Clark, who you will hear, is one of the founding members, and she'll talk a little bit more about our programs at Haven Society. These two undergrad students recognized a gap in service delivery in our community in terms of supporting women who were fleeing violence, and they boldly applied for some federal funding and was successful. And hence, Haven Society was born. At the beginning, Haven Society was managed through volunteerism, and our volunteers would house women fleeing violence in their basements. It became quite clear quite quickly that this was an unsafe situation for both volunteers and clients. You know, as Bonnie has talked about, it's a very fragile time when a woman flees the violent situation in which she finds herself in. And so throughout the last 42 years, we have developed programs to support women and children who are fleeing intimate partner violence. We have a transition house located in Nanaimo, and we have a safe house located in Parksville. Our safe house was created in 2013. We've operated now for 7 years, and we've done so in collaboration with SOS. SOS have been huge supporters of the work that we do, and in fact, the house that we operate in, the safe house that provides safe shelter, is actually their house that they allow us to operate in for free. So we're very, very grateful for their support. So I've been asked to touch a little bit on COVID and what COVID means to us and how that has changed. And I think probably the starting place for that is to understand that, yes, in our workplace, COVID has had a significant impact, but we're really, really proud to say that we have not shut our doors. We haven't changed our programs. We have been available to our clients right from the very beginning. In spite of all the craziness swirling around us, that COVID-19 has brought. There's complexities, of course, particularly in communal living. How do you ensure clients, and women and children are safe and staff are safe? And in terms of the programs that we deliver, how do we ensure that that they're still meaningful and impactful. We know that the violence that women are fleeing is significant enough that in spite of a global pandemic, we had no choice but to make sure that we set forth different rules of engagement, but for sure we're there for our clients each and every time. The global pandemic aside, there is what in our sector is referring to as a shadow pandemic. And the shadow pandemic is an alarming increase of violence against women that we're experiencing now in our society. This is attributed to confined living conditions, household economic and food insecurities as a result of COVID-19. And it has absolutely intensified the cases of domestic violence, putting women and their children in immediate danger. The clients that we're seeing now, there's some pretty horrific things that they are experiencing and that children are witnessing. I think it's really important to remember too, globally, 35% of women have experienced physical and or sexual intimate partner violence or sexual violence from a non-partner. That's a staggering number when you think about the population of the globe. According to the Canadian Femicide Observatory for Justice and Accountability, a total of 118 women and girls were killed by violence in Canada in 2019. So on average, every 3 days, one woman or one girl is killed in Canada. I am confident that you share with me the absolute unacceptability of those statistics in our neighborhood, in our country. I think it's also really important to remember that less than 40% of women who experience violence actually seek help of any kind. So one of the things that is really important for us at Haven Society in our advocacy role are taking opportunities like this to talk about our services, to talk about what we do and how we can help, because maybe it might not be that particular listener who needs our services, but rest assured it could be someone that they know. It's really important that we break down isolation for our clients and let them know that we are here to support them. So in going forward, what will we concentrate on? Knowing that we have a COVID-19 as a pandemic, knowing that we have a shadow pandemic with an increased rise of violence in our community. There's going to be several key focuses. One of them is something we've been working on for a while now, and that's diversity, equity, and inclusion at Haven Society. The board started with this work probably 18 months ago, perhaps a wee bit more. And you know, it's about making sure that Haven Society provides cultural safety for the women that we serve and the children that we serve, and making sure that we view our services through the lens of diversity so that we're meeting our clients where they are. That work will continue. It's extremely important to us. The second area that we will be looking at is innovation. And COVID-19 didn't really give us a choice in terms of innovation, but it's perhaps one of the silver linings that we've grabbed onto and we've ran. And by that, I mean, how do we utilize technology at Haven Society to ensure that we can meet the needs of our clients? We now can provide services either face-to-face or via telephone or via a virtual platform such as Zoom, to provide services. And what we're finding now is that we're reaching clients that perhaps we wouldn't have been able to assist before because of isolation, because of living in a remote area, or perhaps just because of transportation challenges. So we'll look into the future, in the very near future, and we're working on how do we make sure that we strengthen innovation in the workplace. And the last piece that we're looking at and really concentrating on is our fundraising efforts. I mean, we are very fortunate to be funded through various ministries at the BC government level, and then augmented through fundraising. And Oceanside area have been a huge supporter of the work that we do, and we're very, very grateful. We anticipate with this tsunami of work that's coming our way because of the shadow pandemic, because of the rise in violence in our communities, that our services are going to be needed even more. And yet it's at a time when we're worried about our funding from the government level, and what is the cost of COVID-19, and is that going to have any implications on the funding that comes our way? So it's one of the things we will concentrate on, and we will turn to the community, as we always have, with gratitude for supporting the work that we do. So if you have any questions for me, thank you very much for my time. I know I'm a few seconds over. I appreciate being able to be with you today.
Thank you, Toni. That was excellent, really informative. Our next speaker is Dawn Clark, who has a BA in Women's Studies and is the housing manager at Haven Society. Dawn brings 40 years of frontline service, coordination, supervision, and management of women's, children's, family, and youth programming and services. She is passionate about responding to survivors of gender-based crimes to ensure their dignity and support and overall recovery. Dawn.
Thank you. I'm really honored to be a part of this panel today, and I thank you for inviting me to speak. And I also want to acknowledge the courage that it took for Bonnie to share her story. So I really appreciate Bonnie's willingness to sit with us today and talk about her personal experience. Thank you, Bonnie. I hope I don't I'm going to be doing a little bit of editing so that I don't repeat a lot of what Toni has spoken about. At Haven, we believe that no one deserves to be abused and that violence has no place in relationship or society. Also, we value diversity, inclusion, equity, mutual respect, and interdependence while acknowledging our personal and collective privilege. We strongly maintain these core beliefs to help foster healthy relationships, which in turn contributes to a healthier community. And I think that that's the cornerstone of the work that we do. We work from an intersectional feminist framework, incorporating a critical lens to systems of power. And we see power as one's ability to access systems successfully to have their needs and desires met. Unfortunately, that's not always the case for the women who access our services. Oftentimes, social or economic status, education, religion, ethnicity, class, gender, sexuality, abilities, geographic location, mental wellness, and experience of colonization can present huge barriers for many who come to, for many of the women who are marginalized and live on the edges of traditional feminism. I also think that it's important to stress that violence and abuse is not discriminatory. We see clients from all walks of life. Our intention is to always work from a client-centered, trauma-informed perspective that values the individual and their personal experiences. In other words, we believe our client is the expert and will always tell us when and what they need. Our mandate is to provide safe shelter, emotional support, trauma counseling, justice-related services, and outreach support. Violence and abuse take many forms. It can be physical, emotional, psychological, or financial. Many women report having experienced all of the above. Our flagship programs at Haven are our transition house here in Nanaimo and our safe house in Parksville. I'm going to talk in particular about the house in Nanaimo after I talk a little bit about the programs that we offer at Haven. As I said, we have our transition house, and as Toni said, we started providing shelter services to women in the Nanaimo Regional District 42 years ago. And I was fortunate enough to be one of the first staff, pretty young at the time, didn't really know what I was doing, but I learned a lot, and I'm really grateful for the learning that took place for me and the women and the kids that I met, and also the work that we did with volunteers. Some of the programs that we offer at Haven are Stopping the Violence, which is a counseling program for women who have experienced trauma, either past trauma or current trauma. We have the Peace Program, which is a program that primarily works with kids and also families who have experienced violence, have stabilized somewhat in the community, and are now at a point where they're willing to work at and address the trauma that they experienced while they were in an abusive home. We have outreach services, which is a community-based program. Staff work with community women and provide a host of services from housing to individual support in terms of helping them get on their feet, stay on track, and resourcing them wherever they need to be resourced in the community. We also have community victim services. We have an office in the Oceanside in Parksville, and we have an office here. And our community victim services work with clients who are connected to the justice system and need support in terms of wending their way through that system. And as I said, the transition house here in Nanaimo and the safe house in Parksville are our flagship programs. Our transition house in Nanaimo is able to house up to 17 people, although as with most transition houses in the province and across the country, we've had to close down a couple of rooms in the transition house to ensure people's safety. I'm going to focus on the Parksville house, and this house is centrally located in Parksville, and we can provide safe shelter and supportive services to a maximum of 3 women and 4 children. And we could provide safe shelter and supportive services to a maximum of 3 children and 4 children, 3 women and 4 children during non-COVID times. During COVID, our doors, as Toni said, remained open with increased enhanced cleaning protocols, an agency COVID safety plan, extensive health-related protocols were introduced. When the pandemic hit, we were declared an essential services, and as such, we needed to be there and available 24/7. However, we needed to also decrease our capacity to 2 women and up to 3 children to ensure appropriate physical distancing for the well-being of all. The unused room has been designated as an isolation room with access to a washroom if need be. So how do women come to us? Women are can be referred by community resources. However, we do ask that we speak directly with the individual. Most of our shelter requests go through the through the crisis line in Nanaimo, which is situated at our transition house. The crisis line is answered by a woman support worker who is trained to assess the level of service a woman may require. Because the Parksville Qualicum Haven House is a safe house, stays at the house are generally 7 to 10 days. Having said that, this past year, stays have been longer due to low vacancy rates, high rents, and now with COVID, it's that much harder to find a rental. Women who come to the safe house meet regularly with staff to determine their immediate and long-term needs. These needs often always include crisis support, as well as referrals to community supports, advocacy, referrals to housing and rental assistance programs, and whatever else they may require that fits within our scope of service. Staffing at the house consists of a program coordinator and a woman support worker who both work part-time. Also, we utilize casual staff to support the house and have an on-call system in place which allows residents to access staff after hours. Excuse me. We've been fortunate to witness several women leave the house feeling empowered and successfully transition into a lifestyle that supports their goals and aspirations. One young woman comes to mind. When she came to the Parksville Qualicum Haven House, she was a single woman in her early 30s with 2 children not in her care. While at the house, she was able to initiate regular visitation with her children, access community supports, and was supported to enroll in and complete a Clementi course through VIU. Clementi is an introductory first-year university course with credits for low-income single parents. She is now living independent independent from her abusive partner, has full-time care of her 2 children, and intends to continue with post-secondary education. I believe that this may not have happened without the support she received from staff and an opportunity to live in the second stage suite for a minimum for 3 months. In 2020, we were able to provide shelter services to 24 women. In 2019-20, we were able to provide shelter services to 24 women and 20 children. As of April 2020, we have provided shelter to 11 women and 4 children. COVID has changed the way we do our work. Since COVID, like many provincial and national transition and safe homes programs, we have noticed a decrease in the women coming into the house, but are having longer stays. Other shelter programs report stays up to 5 months. Women report situations that are more complex and thus require intensive supports. This trend is coupled with an increase in the number of women calling for emotional support, information about our program, resource information, and safety planning. Yet many are not ready to leave due to COVID-related fears or report they are under the constant eye of their offender and fearful of what might happen if they do try to leave. The urgency that we are facing at the moment is how do we keep women and children safe who are paralyzed by this pandemic. Women have been affected in a variety of ways, such as freedom of choice, disproportionate job loss, and increased childcare responsibilities, to name a few. Shelters need core funding to develop and deliver innovative services and funding for transportation for better access to our shelters. Just of note, we just had a woman come to our transition house in Nanaimo who hitchhiked all the way from Port Hardy to get here. She wasn't feeling safe in the north end of the island, felt that she needed to get out of the community, and felt that Nanaimo would be a much safer place for her to come. But she hitchhiked because there was no money available in that community that could support her to get here. And nor do we have funding to support people to make the trek from one end of the island to the other. So that's something that we're beginning to hear about and we're beginning to experience. For women to successfully transition from an unsafe environment in a shelter, they need access to affordable second stage housing with supports in place to further address their needs. Lastly, we need core funding and staff training that will support culturally safe shelter practices and provide services that speak to women who live on the edges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dawn. It's really informative. That's an amazing story about that woman hitchhiking. Oh gosh. Okay, our next speaker is Dr. Paddy Mark. She is an addiction specialist, a family doctor who became interested in this field about 30 years ago. She sees it as a fascinating branch of medicine in that it involves not only addiction work, but a lot of family practice and a necessary understanding of mental illness. She works as an addiction doctor full-time in jails, in the hospital, and in downtown clinic in Nanaimo. She also gives lectures and works with family practice residents to help them understand addiction. She has received an award from the College of Family Practice for her efforts. Dr. Mark.
Hi there. Now, can I've unmuted, so I'm hoping you can hear me.
Yes.
Very good information. Thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate all the detail that I've heard and the story, first-hand story. Not the first time I've heard that sort of story, but very profound. I'm going to come at this from I don't have a presentation, I'm just going to talk. I come at this from a slightly different angle because I work in jails where I see the abusers. Now, one of the things I learned early on in my addictions career was that drugs and alcohol are invariably, eventually, turn people to violence. Alcohol is huge in spousal abuse, huge, and child abuse. The men whom I see in jail, and I'm not trying to kind of take the focus off women, but if we're going to try and change anything, we've got to try and deal with what causes this. And the cause, for the most part, of the violence against women from the men I see in jail is huge childhood trauma in their own lives. I have heard stories that would literally curl your hair that I can hardly bear to think about, of what happened to these men when they were children, inflicted by their own parents, who probably had trauma inflicted on them by their parents. Hurt people hurt people. So if you've got a man who has been subjected to every kind of violence imaginable, including sexual abuse, physical, the whole 9 yards, chances are he's going to be violent in return to the next person that he becomes in any way connected with. It happens in jails. These men beat each other up. It happens on the street. My addicted patients beat each other up. And it happens to their women, serially, because most of these men have many women in their lives and they treat them all badly. Now, one of the things that we do not do in any field at the moment, because it's not funded, we do not treat trauma. And there is trauma treatment available. It's just not funded. Psychotherapists with training in trauma treatment can do a tremendous job in helping men and women to process their trauma and move into a more realistic life. I think it's the women in the jail on the mainland, the Alouette, the jail for women, they have horrendous stories too. I mean, they've all been abused. I have never yet seen a man in jail or a woman who has been arrested for violence against whoever, usually their spouses or their girlfriends or some kind of women in their lives, who have not been themselves exposed to trauma. There's the odd one who's just a psychopath, a sociopath, because we have a lot of mental illness tangled up in all this stuff. So one of the things I would really like to put forward, and we need to do some work on this, I'm trying to do work on it at the mental health and addictions level in Victoria, is to try to start looking at men and women who've struggled with trauma to get them treatment, because otherwise it's going to go on, and it's a revolving door. People serve their sentences. We have counselors, we have psychologists, we have psychiatrists, which you won't get in the community, by the way. Try to get an appointment to a psychiatrist in the community, you might as well paint it purple and fan it with a hat. It'll be 6 months down the road, by which time the crisis, if there is a crisis or whatever it is, it will be long gone. And the psychiatrists themselves tell me that what their patients need, 50–70% of them need, is a psychotherapist, not a psychiatrist. Psychiatrists prescribe medication. And antidepressants, Bonnie, you were given an antidepressant. I can tell you now, antidepressants don't work for situational depression and anxiety. They just don't. They work for true depression and anxiety, which is part of a genetic thing as a rule that runs in families. So we are not doing very well treating the men and women who are involved at one side or the other of all this horrible violence. I'm going to be getting onto that, I hope, before too long. Of course, COVID has taken everybody's mind off everything except COVID. So I'm struggling a little bit to get anybody's attention about this. I've referred people to Haven. I've referred men to John Howard. I've referred, I've got them into treatment centers, women into treatment centers, into safe houses, into places where they will at least have a chance of learning to some normal behavior and responses. And it's no good just locking people up. I mean, I'm delighted some of these guys are in jail, exactly where they should be, but then they will actually get some help. Leaving them on the street to find another woman to abuse it's just silly. I mean, it just doesn't work. So we have got to, I think, be a lot more proactive in trying to help women and men to understand that we need to reduce this to an illness which can be treated. Not everybody will respond. Nobody responds to everything. It's just one of those things. But I think we could do much better if we were prepared to and able to and insisted upon funded treatment, psychotherapy for abusers and abused. Just treating the abused is not going to do the job, because there will be other women. So that's my 10 cents worth. And I believe in this quite passionately. I have a psychotherapist's daughter who is employed in Ontario they're not employed, they're they charge, but she has sent people, a lot of women who have struggled with the most horrible abuse, rape victims, kidnapping victims, the usual 9 yards, which happens. And, I've learned a lot from her about trauma and the need to deal with it. So anyway, that's my contribution. I think we need to look at this maybe through a little bit of a different lens. What you're doing is totally wonderful, but I'm not sure it's quite enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think that insight is very valuable for us to, as you say, look at it from another lens. Very good. Thank you. Well, we also have someone else to help us see from a different perspective, and that's Dave Arnell, who is a spokesperson for Men Choose Respect and who works for the Domestic Violence Response Program, which is an arm of NARSF, Nanaimo and Area Resource Service for Families. So welcome, Dave, please.
All right, and there's so much to say about this. I hope I can get through it in a timely way. First of all, I want to say as a man on the panel, I feel the burden of the debt that I think men owe women in our culture in terms of debt of justice. And when I hear those stories, I'm very aware of the difficulties in the way we raise men, in the way we socialize men, in what we expect of men, and in ways in which we heal men. I came up as a child welfare social worker and a child welfare supervisor. I remember some of my first days as a supervisor in Grand Prairie, Alberta. I had the Crown Counsel call me one day, and he said, we're assuming that you don't want any of these guys charged because you want to do therapy with them. I said, what? And to me, being clear about the responsibility was an essential step in treatment. And that's what I said to the Crown Counsel. I said, if they should be charged, they should be charged. Once as a community, we've made it clear about where the responsibility lies, then, counseling can be useful. I also was exposed fairly early on to an Australian narrative therapist named Ellen Jenkins, who wrote a book called Invitation to Responsibility. And that has guided my work and still guides my work. So let me tell you about my work is. When I started in the ministry in Nanaimo, there was 2 common social work responses to domestic violence. And one was, well, it's not our business unless the kids were hurt, which I think was just ducking responsibility. And the second was, well, if something has to be done, then we tell the woman, kick the guy out, leave, or we'll take your kids away. And that seemed very inadequate to me for 2 reasons. One, because it put all the responsibility for solving the problem of domestic violence, particularly where there's kids involved, on the woman. And that was kind of piling on the victim to me. And I also objected on the grounds that if the ministry is going to say a guy shouldn't be allowed to parent because of his behavior, then there should be a route for him to address his behavior and rehabilitate himself. So I kind of argued for a thing like the Domestic Violence Response Program when I was still in the ministry. And I was very glad that the ministry hooked up with Teresa Garten, who was already doing the Men Choose Respect groups. And what the ministry did is it added individual counseling before the group and after the group to kind of make sure that it was focused on the individual guy and particularly on the safety of the kids. So one of the things I'm kind of influenced by is even in the ministry, we used to have a risk assessment model that said, if you were abused as a kid, you're more likely to abuse your kids. And so if a parent told us that they were abused as a kid, we were more likely to take their kids away from them because we considered them higher risk. And people have often done the study, and Paddy, you were certainly right in almost all the people I meet who are abusive have been abused. But nobody had ever done the study the other way to say, let's look at all the people who were abused as kids and how they turned out. And it turns out that a much greater majority of people who were abused as kids are kind of champions of justice as adults. That being abused as a kid isn't a sentence to a certain life. And that you can make choices whatever has happened to you. And one of the things in our program is we're kind of careful not to use therapy as an excuse mechanism. We know that lots of things have happened to lots of people. We're confident that most people can exercise responsibility and move themselves towards justice and happiness and should be held accountable for that. So in our program, there's two of us, Sean, my partner, and I. We see guys individually, and we kind of do that invitation to responsibility to start with, which is being clear about being not shying away from the actual behavior they committed, to making sure that they're able to look at that clearly, and to give them the opportunity to step back and think about, is that really what you want? And what do you really want? The Teresa's group, and Sean and I participate as co-facilitators. Teresa's group takes guys through lots of sort of ways of looking at abuse and ways of thinking about it and ways of kind of repositioning their own sense of agency and responsibility. And then after the group, Sean and I will see the guy to say, what did you get out of it? How do you want to present yourself? What do you want to tell the social worker? Because we're exclusively a MCF related program, the DVRP part. The group is open to anybody, but the before and after part is just for MCF related guys. We've also interestingly added in the group quite a bit of content about fathering. And it's interesting to us that we can get guys way more tenderhearted talking about their role as fathers. And I think that's a really important element in making them active and responsible sort of human beings. I did want to talk about the parental alienation argument, only to kind of grump about it because it kind of ticks me off. And it is a part of, and it's kind of a part of what I mean by not using therapy to make excuses. There are men's programs who sort of focus on, well, men are victims too, and we should just understand them in that way. And while lots of the guys that I meet have been victims of various things, and lots of them need help with lots of those things, that doesn't take away from their ability to grow in responsibility and to look at themselves responsibly. And so I know that in my private practice, I met people who made the argument about parental alienation. And it just seems to me that, I would say to men that as a man, they're just responsible for being safe as parents and safe as partners. Other people get to make their own decisions about whether they trust that or not. The other thing is, back in the 80s, when I was first involved in this kind of stuff, I did a John Howard group I was a co-facilitator in a John Howard group about it. And it was interesting at the time, there got to be a real opposition to men's groups. And at first I didn't understand it, but then the argument was that there were lots of men's groups being set up in which mostly male counselors talked to guys about being abusive and then told the authorities whether or not the guys were cured or not. And lots of women really were upset at the fact that male counselors were defining guys as cured without any reference to how they actually were in their relationships or what was really going on. So one of the things we're very careful about in our program is we don't say that attendance to the program does anything. The guys have to go back to the social workers and make a case that they got something out of the program. And the social worker has to look and get feedback from everybody who's affected by the guy. About half of our guys are in relationships where both parties want to make it work. And about a half are in relationships where one or both parties don't want to make it work and want to separate. Either way doesn't take away from the fact that, because all of our guys are parents, because through the ministry, even if they're separating, they have responsibility to make themselves a safe parent. It's interesting, Patty, what you said about addiction even. We find that there's almost a case for making a group in Nanaimo called like Nonviolent Al-Anon. There are a number of cases where guys are trying to control a partner's addiction. And they may even be trying to control that addiction from a genuine concern about their partner. But they get into trying to control the partner and take responsibility for it, and that can lead to violence too. It's just a little interesting side population that I've noticed. Boy, I think I got through my list. I think it's most important that we don't have declarations to make about men. I think as men, we need to answer to women lots. So if there's things that people are curious about, I hope in the question and answer period, people will ask about that. So thank you.
Thank you, Dave. That was really informative too. Thank you so much. And now, last but not least, we have Tara Guelle, Constable Tara Guelle, who is an RCMP member for 17 years, working a combination of general duty and specialty units such as domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse. Her current position at the Oceanside detachment is domestic violence missing persons. She has been in this position for just over a year and works closely with both police-based and community-based victim services. She is also a member of Oceanside Integrated Case Assessment Team, or ICAT. So let's hear from Tara.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this panel. I really appreciate it. I think domestic violence is a serious issue, and I think the more we talk about it and the more we share information, the better we make it for our clients. So to talk about the Oceanside detachment, we did have a position that was created back in October of 2019. Since that position started, I've been working on building and developing having more connections with the community partners. I believe that the collaborative community approach in dealing with our victims and helping our victims is the most essential thing. I think that not one organization can do it alone, that I think that the more support we have around people, the better that for them to make the decision that's right for them. I also believe that, they know the best, what's best for them, how safe they're going to be. And I think just supporting them the best way that we can is the key in this. So I do have some statistics that I'll share, but I do want to say that I absolutely believe and know that the percentage of domestic violence incidences are underreported to the police. There's generally lots of barriers why people don't report. One of those barriers is because of the police, because they don't know what's going to happen. They don't know what the consequences are. They don't know what an investigation looks like. They don't know what court's going to look like. So there's a real fear of just the unknown of what it would look like when the police are involved. And so in that regards, that's why I believe this position at the Oceanside detachment is so important. I really try and make myself available to people for the community and their clients to answer those questions. You know, I love it when people call up and say, hi, Tara, I've got a client here and she's just wondering what this would look like, or what does that look like? What is criminal harassment? You know, does she have to come in and provide a statement? So all those questions, I'm just so happy to answer. And I really believe that empowering people with that knowledge of what those choices are will help them, you know, decide what's the best for them. So some statistics. So what I looked at is the way we score our files. There's little check marks and little boxes that we check off. And so what I looked at, there was a series of criteria that I looked at. So one was spousal and partner assaults, spousal and partner dispute with no assault, spousal and partner abuse, and spousal partner other offenses. So basically those categories are pretty wide, and it can include anything from 911 calls, assault calls. There can be things such as criminal harassment, peace bond requests, thefts, mischiefs. So all those files can include a domestic violence part to it and are scored as such. So looking at the statistics, I took from January 2019 to November 2019, and then again from January 2020 to November 2020. So what I saw was that there's been a 20% increase in domestic violence calls for this year compared to last year. So definitely an increase. And I think I've just, you know, speaking in personal, I've noticed that increase myself. I've noticed the increase of severity and frequency since COVID has hit. I was just speaking with a female a couple of weeks ago. She came into the office, she had some questions, and she was saying that her partner worked out of town. And so that when he was away, that gave her that break that she needed and that time. But since COVID hit, when he lost his job or they shut down, he was home more. And that's what we're finding a lot, that, you know, the abusers are at home more often now. The people don't have that access they had before to leave and to get out and to have that break. And financial concerns, emotions are higher. So we are finding that there is a lot more domestic violence calls, and the severity of what we're seeing as well. So I also looked at drug and alcohol, how much they affect the domestic violence calls we have. And I think this is underreported as well. And I think that's just a clerical thing for us. I think that if you don't check one of the little boxes when you're doing your reports, it's not going to show, because I truly believe it is higher. But it's interesting to see that even though I think the percentage is low, so from 2019, January to November, it was 32% of the calls involved drug or alcohol. And for 2020, the percentage of the calls was 40%. So again, that shows that increase. And I think that's the important part to see, is that increase. I think that report is the percentage itself is rather low, but it does show that there has been an increase. So that's a 20% increase in files, 10% increase in drug and alcohol in those files. I also looked at age just to see if there was a certain age range where there was domestic violence that was more prevalent. And I found that there really wasn't. I looked at the age range from 20 to 30 years, which is about 25%. From 30 to 40 was 30%. And from 40 to 50 was 27%. Anything over 50, it did decline significantly. But to look at those age ranges, they were really close. So it just shows that domestic violence is through all different ages. It's not just a certain young 20s or anything like that. It really is vast and diverse for the ages. I also looked at demographics. It was a little harder to pull that information from our system. And I'll just speak from my own knowledge that the domestic violence files that we do go to, it's all over Oceanside. There's not one particular area that has more than the other. I've been to Nanoose, these big, nice, fancy houses. I've been to Bowser. I've been to Qualicum. You know, it's all over. It doesn't seem to be one certain location. As well as looking at just the social economic status of people as well. Again, it's diverse. Again, it's, you know, big fancy houses in a noose, or people struggling with finances to homelessness. There's a vast variety, and it doesn't seem specific to one particular area. It is it's a vast problem. So I just wanted to keep it a little short because I'm being cognizant of time here. But I just wanted to touch base too, to let people know one thing that they're not aware of, and a lot of people aren't aware of, is a domestic violence investigation for a police officer looks a lot different than a different criminal code investigation. So if we go to a file where, let's say, someone caught somebody stealing something, it's up to that complainant or victim, their decision to say if they would like that person charged or not. If they're like, no, I don't want to go with charges, then that doesn't happen. It's up to them. Same with, let's say, two people are having a fight. When a bar lets out, two guys are fighting, and we arrive there and neither of them want to press charges. Again, that's their choice. So with domestic violence, it's different. We have different policies and procedures that we follow. And that is, when we arrive at a domestic violence call, if there is evidence of that the physical assault has occurred, then we do arrest and put forward charges on that person. So this is the difference where it's not up to the victim. There's many reasons that that was implemented. And one thing that I noticed right away with that is when we do that is that takes it off the victim and it takes the blame off them. You know, I can let the person know I'm arresting you, and you can see the anger towards the person. They're like, and you can direct it to the police officer. It's like, no, that's not their choice. This is my choice. This is what I'm doing. And you can see their anger just turn right to you and be directed at the police officer, which is a good thing. We need to direct that anger away. So that's just a slight difference that a lot of people aren't aware of, that decision is taken out of the victim's hands at that time, whereas other investigations are different that way. So that's just one thing I wanted to point out. I've noticed a lot of different stuff with COVID happening. What happens typically too is if we go to a file where, let's say there's some verbal arguing going on, emotions are high, we typically would attend, and if there hasn't been any signs of violence, we'll ask one of the partners, one of the people, to leave the residence for the evening. That way everyone gets a break, emotions can go down, they can come back in the morning and talk about what they need to talk about. And typically it works well. Now we're finding with COVID that people don't have those families or friends' houses that they can go to like they did before. Even hotels, people would go to a hotel for a night. Well, financially, they can't do that now, or they don't want to because of COVID. So we're finding that quite difficult. Whereas before, we would separate them and, you know, really decrease that risk of things escalating, to now when they stay in the house and we do, you know, have repeat calls. So that's just talking COVID wise, some of the things that we've noticed around in our area. And just want to say again, like, I'm so happy to have people call me anytime, and just to you know, give people that knowledge of what it looks like for a police investigation, and what does criminal harassment look like, any kind of information like that. I just think it's really important to share with people so they can make the best decision that will help them. And I understand that sometimes coming to the police isn't the best decision for them, and that's why it's so important to have community partners out there for that as well. So I think that's it. That was rather quick, but I didn't want to take up too much time.
Oh, that was superb, Tara. Thank you so much. The idea of making sure that people are aware is so important, and of course that's why we've had this panel today, so that we can make sure that the information gets out from as many different perspectives as possible. And we are planning on having the recording of this put up on YouTube, so we'll make sure that we let you all know when that happens. We do have a few questions, so we'll move on to them because we have gone a little bit over time, but you've all been very good. Thank you so much. There is one for Dawn. How much contact have you had with refugee families is the question. The thinking is that some women from certain parts of the world would never approach anyone directly. So is that something that you can speak to, Dawn?
Yeah, I can actually. Sorry. I'm not mute. I can. Probably about, I would say about 3 or 4 years ago, we were lucky enough to become a pilot. Our transition house here in Nanaimo was lucky enough to become a pilot program for refugee and immigrant women that was funded through the BC Society of Transition Houses, which is a provincial organization. So that, with that funding, it allowed our program coordinator in Nanaimo, as well as our program coordinator at the Parksville Qualic and Haven House, to go to Vancouver and receive training, and also come back and sort of develop relationships with their local multicultural society in terms of what that could look like moving forward. So as a result, we've been able to provide services that are culturally sensitive, that are specific to the individual. I'll give you an example. We had a woman who was in her house at one point in time, and she was from Kenya. She was a Muslim woman whose mother had gone to Mecca on a pilgrimage. And I don't know if you recall at the time that there was a stampede, like these large groups of people, like thousands of people were descending upon this mosque and coming from 3 different directions, and several people were trampled. Our resident knew that her mother was in Mecca at the time, couldn't get a hold of her mother, and so what our staff did was absolutely amazing. Is that we managed to find someone who spoke Arabic, and invite them to come into the transition house at 4 o'clock in the morning, because in order to speak with the police, that needed to be 4 o'clock in the morning our time, and speak with the police in Mecca to unfortunately discover that her mother had been one of those people trampled. We've had women in the house because of cultural practices are staying at the house but having to go back to their home during the day to look after the kids. So we've been able to really do a lot of accommodation in terms of what works best for the individual. We have a great relationship with the Multicultural Society. We can call upon them at any time. We also have a program that we've just initiated within the last 6 months. It's called Can Talk. So it's an interpretation service. And so if we have somebody whose English isn't all that well, we're able to call this call center and speak and have them speak with somebody who can interpret what needs to be interpreted. We have also used Google Translate. We had a woman who didn't speak English but spoke Mandarin. She had her iPad, we had Google Translate, and so that's how we basically communicated with her. We've had Syrian women in the house. The interesting thing is that it's a very, lots of communities are very small communities, and so confidentiality is extremely important. We have workers at the house that come from different ethnic backgrounds, and they're part of that small community. So that's been an issue to assure women that are coming into our programs that we maintain utmost confidentiality, and that while they're in the house, they can rest assured that our staff, who might be a member of their community, is not going to have conversations within that community and divulge where they may be. It's very individualized, but yes, we have had many women from various backgrounds, and some that have been refugees and don't have status.
Right. Oh, that's really a good resource for them, though. It's wonderful to know that it's available. Thank you. We have another question. I think probably would best go to Tara. Does the increased coverage of this issue during this time of year, the UN Spotlight on Gender-Based Violence, cause an increase, do you think, in the number of calls for help?
I hope that it would. I don't know that statistic. I'd have to, look at that time frame and pull data from this specific time frame. But I hope that it would.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That we hope so too. Of course, that would raise awareness anyway.
Absolutely.
Hey, another question: do young women in violent relationships require a different approach? Maybe Toni, could you address that question?
Well, I'll certainly give it a go. I'm not sure what we're talking about whether this is an underage individual or not, which of course there would be consideration for.
I think they're looking at maybe teenagers or people fairly young still.
I think this was mentioned quite well by Dawn, but our mandate is to really meet the client where the client is. So depending on those particular situations, I think we're quite equipped and quite nimble to be able to, whether it's a child that we're supporting through, whether it would be a young mom or not, whether, there's intersectionality in terms of, what the lived experience of the client might be that is coming to us. I think we're quite equipped to it. So there's so many variables involved. It's difficult to answer that question directly, other than we're quite equipped at being nimble, at being able to be able to help a client with where she feels she needs help with.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Toni. We have a question from someone asking whether the number of alcohol outlets in Parksville is mentioned here is something which the community should have more input on, that the feeling is that alcohol is too freely available. Who would like to jump on that one? Is there anybody who feels that that's something they can speak to? No? Okay. I know I have a general question. From the very beginning, I wondered what our community, the Oceanside community, could do that would be in any way a practical response to the problem, especially now with the increase because of COVID. Is there anything that we should be trying to be movers and shakers about, as our organization at least could perhaps do? I mean, we're used to signing petitions, we're used to raising money, but is there something that would be of a more practical application? And anyone think of anything there?
I mean, I would like to comment that I think you are doing it. It's the advocacy piece and the education piece that's so powerful. The more people that hear this message, the more people that bring voice to the solution. I think that the stronger we are as a community to be able to address it, it's multifaceted for sure. We've heard today about, different aspects of the Men Choose Respect program, which incidentally is a Haven Society program, and the offerings that we have, it's just being able to get the word out that we're here. And so, yes, we're very grateful for fundraising. The advocacy piece is equally as important. And I raise my hands and thank you.
Well, it's been our pleasure, actually. This has been a fascinating project for us. And we have spoken about maybe a different tack next year, but we'll have to wait and see whether we want to have a panel on a different topic. But this has been wonderful. And I'd like to thank all of you for participating. It's been something that has been a real eye opener. And I hope for all of those who have been watching that it's been helpful, informative, and maybe, has made a difference for them. I particularly like to thank Victoria Morris for the technological support she's given, because without her, this would not have happened. I don't know if we have any other questions. I'll just do a quick check here of my notes. I know that someone did ask about the parental alienation issue, but I think that, Dave, you've actually dealt with that. Oh, the shadow pandemic, I guess, is an interesting topic, idea. And I've seen that mentioned in other places as well. It's certainly, I think, on the national awareness, it's something that has become an issue. And I don't know if that's simply because this last few days we've had this UN focus, but it would be nice if we could keep it in focus for the rest of the year, because it can't stop. You know, we have to support women and children and men as well. I mean, obviously.
Diane,
Okay.
I just had one question.
Yes.
It's Janet. Have anybody ever made presentations every year at the high school for the girls and the boys on this issue? If you want to raise awareness in the community, that's the place to start.
I would agree. As a former high school teacher myself, I have never seen that kind of a presentation, although I suspect the counseling people within the high schools will have that on their radar. But I don't know what's happening these days. I've been retired for a little while.
I can speak to that perhaps.
Okay.
Well, we actually have a violence is preventable program that we go into schools, including secondary schools. And with that exact focus is the prevention piece, which is just so needed so that we can get off this kind of revolving sort of cycle of violence. That's been interesting during COVID too, because of course we can't go into school. So, you know, we did a go around by creating videos that teachers in schools, District 68 specifically, but we offered it provincially actually to any of the school districts. So school district 69 as well, for teachers to be able to download or upload, whichever it may be, to their whiteboards for a resource for kids. And it talks all about violence and what to do during COVID. So those can also be found on our website. But that prevention program, I mean, if we could be in every school similarly to a DARE program or whatnot, we would be so delighted. But again, it comes down to funding and what the government is willing us to fund us for that program.
Well, that's really interesting. That funding would make the difference there. Sherry, I think you have a comment to make.
Oh, no, just a question for Tara. There was restorative justice. I think it might still be available. Is that right, at the RCMP?
Correct. There is restorative justice that we use quite a bit. Not so much for power-based crimes such as domestic violence, but we do have restorative justice, yeah, for sure.
Okay, I just wondering if there was ever a restorative justice conference that would possibly work with some of the calls that you get in, you know, where you might include close relatives and others that might be supportive to the young woman or whoever in distress. No?
No, the restorative justice doesn't typically take on domestic violence files. Again, they're more power-based and they don't typically deal with those ones. Yeah.
Thank you.
Are there other questions that have not? Oh, we have one from Val. Oh no, just a thank you. We have many thank yous coming in. That's great. Lovely. Does anyone else have any questions to direct to our panel members? Anyone at all? No. I think we may be almost coming to the end of our time. It's gone very smoothly, thank goodness, I think. This is my first time doing something like this. Although I did tell you all that I was an English teacher and I did moderate many a debate in my classroom, but this has been a bit different. But so I have to tell you, your speeches were much more interesting in most cases. Yes, very good. Okay, anyone from our advocacy committee wishing to make a comment? Eva Hilborn, are you there? She is the lady who came up with this idea. Eva is a life force within our group, I have to tell you. Are you there, Eva? Her family are with her, so she may not have stayed all the whole time. Yeah. Oh, there she is. Hello, Eva.
Yeah. Well, this idea struck me a year ago when we had the red dress ceremony at Parksville Community Center, and there was a little girl there about 4 or 5 years of age. And I thought at that time, yeah, we have to teach young children how to respect other children, other parents. We have to help boys recognize that girls are important and just as smart as they are. So, and then I thought South Pacific. Oh yes, racism by Hammerstein, you know, and we just had to get started in not being silent after maybe 2 months, we never hear about the case of abuse. And then we sort of recognize them every year, the Montreal massacre, but in between we do nothing. So I want to thank all of you today for participating and giving our community good information. And I hope that we can have another panel session, maybe in the springtime. Maybe the pandemic will be over. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Eva. Very good.
There's a way to clap, isn't there?
There's an applause button.
How to clap.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
We have a very long comment from Christine Muse. I'd like to read it. It worries me that we do not put an active word, primarily male violence against women and children, that we are not looking up the river to systemic patriarchy and other issues such as systemic racism. I think it is important to highlight the recent incident in Ontario where the 1-year-old was shot after an incident of male violence. The shooting in Nova Scotia, which also began as male violence and was carried out as primarily a female act with male collateral. I do understand the gendered spectrum and thus the word gendered violence. However, in the years since the Montreal Massacre, which is the Canadian National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women on December 6th, while there are exceptions to who is committing the violence, there is enough evidence to name it and offer the appropriate supports and help to heal the pain and suffering that allows a human being to hurt another human being.
Mm-hmm.
So there, from Christine Muse, I believe is her name. We have had, somebody else has suggested, what about videos for teachers? We could perhaps let them know that this will be a YouTube video that they could use in the classroom. That might be an idea that we can reach out and say. I don't know if we invited the counselors and we invited the superintendent of the 69 school district to attend. I'm not sure if they have because we don't know all the people who are watching, but we certainly could let them know afterwards as a follow-up that we have made a recording of these of the presentations. Not the question part of it, but the actual presentations. And one other question, what is the biggest gap in Parksville Qualicum? Anybody? Is it the funding for? Anyone want to take that on? I think this will be our last question. We're really at the end. Oh, the biggest gap.
Well, I mean, funding is absolutely it's a gap everywhere. We struggle for every dollar that we have, and I kid you not, but that's not uncommon in it for a not-for-profit world, of course. Just trying to get traction to increase the funding and then hang on to it for dear life. It's kind of the name of the game for us. So we're very reliant on the support of the community. And very grateful too. And just to tag on to the question that one of the attendees was asking, we have VIP videos that are resources for the community on our website for teachers. So if that's something that could help, Marcia, please go and look at havensociety.com to the resource page. We've got all kinds of COVID research resources there for children and for parents. And I think that you may find something there too. And if that isn't exactly, or you can't access it, please call me and I'll get you connected with the right person. Anything we can do to help, you bet.
Okay, I have a technical question for Victoria. Is there any way for me to highlight and copy the set of questions that we have? I've tried. There isn't any under edit. There isn't any copy paste.
No, there's not. You would just have to copy them out from the chat and save them off in a separate, like a notepad.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I was thinking. Now they won't disappear as long as I don't close this session. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. That works. So I think we've come to the end of our time, and I hope this has been informative and interesting for everyone. It certainly has been for me. And once again, I thank you all for joining us today and for all of your input and wonderful stories and excellent information.
Thank you, Diane.
Truly wonderful. Thank you, Eva, for the idea. Okay.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.